everyone, welcome for this live interview on my secret bookshelf. And today we are going to do our live interview with author Sarbpreet Singh on his book The Story of the Sikh. I'm sure you have read it, and if not, then you should read it. I really enjoyed reading this book and I'm looking forward for this interview. You know, the best thing about this book is that it has the entire history of it. And you're going to really enjoy reading it even if you don't belong to this religion or you don't follow this religion. It's written so well that it will keep you continuously turning the pages. And there is also a twist. There is prose and poetry mixed in it. That is the most exciting part, but does not make this heavy book boring and makes you want to read more and more. I'm looking forward for this interview and I hope you are looking forward too. So let's send a request to author and he should be here anytime. By the way, let me also tell you, this is his first live interview. So we are having a little technical glitch, but we are looking forward for this Insta live with him. And he should join us really soon, and sir is here already. So let's send him a request. And I am trying to send a request to sir and accept it and join us soon, and we should get started. I'm all excited for this interview. You can keep your hearts pouring in and also the questions pouring in. Hello sir, welcome on this Insta Live.
Good evening and thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm going to hound you with a lot of questions because the moment I read the book, I was all excited to have this interview with you, and I had so many questions in my mind and heart.
Wonderful.
So, sir, tell me, how did this journey begin to write this into a book?
Absolutely. The answer is going to be a little long, I'm afraid. So when I left India, decades ago to attend graduate school in the US, I had a very slim connection to my background and my heritage. Having grown up in Sikkim, I was as far removed from Sikh culture and Punjabi culture as you could possibly be. I think it was in my early years in the US that, like a lot of people who leave their context, I started in a certain sense searching for my roots. And really, this book is a distillation of everything that I learned over my journey. So that's the short answer as to how this came about.
Also, sir, there is an emotional journey because you were searching your roots, and though you gave us a short answer, you also distilled a lot of facts that you went through in so many years to make it crisp for us. What was your emotional quotient while you were on this journey?
So that's a difficult question because we're talking about a long journey. But, growing up in a place where Sikhs were a rarity, there were literally 2 Sikh families in Gangtok when I was growing up, I would say that my identity, which immediately identified me as somebody very quote unquote different, was a bit of a burden as I was growing up. And, I grew up in a traditional Sikh household. It was expected of me that I would follow the Sikh way of life, and I did. But as a young man, I have to confess that it didn't really mean very much to me. It was only after I started engaging with the history, which is articulated in the book as a young man, that I really started understanding the underpinnings of this identity, and even more importantly, the sacrifices that my forebears had to make for this identity even to exist. So as a young man, as I read my first books on Sikh history, I remember a surge of pride. That was the first emotion. And as I understood the history, my identity started making a tremendous amount of sense to me. Of course, as I grew older, the emotions changed. And while I was still a young man myself, I started teaching young children, in the diaspora in various parts of the US. And I remember that my overarching thought was, just as it was difficult for me to live with my identity as a young man, I knew it was doubly difficult for young Sikh children in the diaspora to do so, for all the obvious reasons. So, one of the greatest emotions which finds its way into the book is helping young people connect with their heritage and really transmit the sense of pride that I felt as a young man to my young readers. So those were some of the emotions that were playing in my head as I went through the journey.
So while you were telling us, there's a lot of hugs, a lot of love coming your way. There are viewers saying really it is so beautiful and adorable that it is literally a classic best of the day. It is glam all the way. And also, sir, I have to tell you, like you said, you followed the religion, but because you didn't go back in the history, it was just following it. It wasn't coming like I wouldn't say it wasn't coming from heart. You knew it all, but there was still a little emotional attachment left to why was the whole thing followed. And I could relate to it because I have obviously been a believer. We follow the Charlier, we read the Guru Granth Sahib, go to the Gurdwara. I have never been without a kada since the time I was a kid. But there was so much more that came to me after I read the book. It was like as if, something that my grandfather and my great grandfather kept telling me, it was suddenly in a very different light. It was like, all of it was comprised in one book. And so easy for us, the younger generation, to understand, because they have partially been a part and been too religious and read a lot. When you made this book, I'm sure a lot of younger generation also must have connected with you after reading the book. So what were the views that came to you from the younger generation when they were reading about the culture?
Great question. And it's important for me to mention that the book actually first saw life as a podcast of the same name, The Story of the Sikhs podcast. And, while this book is meticulously researched and, all my references and sources are mentioned, I see this primarily as the work of a storyteller rather than the work of a historian. And that sensibility comes through very clearly in the book based on the feedback that I've got. So when the podcast first came out, which was about 3 or 4 years ago, the reaction from particularly my younger listeners was absolutely amazing. I'll give you some examples. One of them called it the podcast of a generation. And there were several others who talked about how the stories that they had sometimes heard at the knees of their grandparents had suddenly come alive for them with a tremendous amount of color. It was really that kind of feedback that prompted me to write the book, because I would get multiple messages saying, "Oh, we love the podcast episodes. Can you please put this in a book so that we can read all the stories?" So it was really very affirming for me. The book was very much written with a young audience in mind, and the reaction to both the podcast and the book was just humbling. That's the only word that I can use.
So how many years did it take from podcast to the journey of the book?
So the podcast was launched in, I think, early 2018. So it's been roughly 3 years. And in the interim, the podcast is now in its 3rd season. So what's contained in the book roughly corresponds to seasons 1 and 2 of the podcast. And season 3 is going to be, which recounts the very turbulent history of the Sikhs in the 1700s, is actually going to come as volume 2 of Story of the Sikhs. So who knows when that's going to happen, but that's in the works as well.
God willing, we hope it happens very soon, because there's a lot more that we want to read from you. And the moment you said that there is a sequel coming, we had hearts flowing like all over here. The readers have been like super excited the moment they heard that from you. So we're going to pray that that book comes really soon, because after reading this book, there's a lot more that we want to read and know from you. And before I move to my next question, I really have to thank you once again to write this book. Also to write it in a way, like you said, it's actually a job of a storyteller than a historian, because what happens is it becomes in today's time, we are in an age where our span is very less. We can't really concentrate on something for too long. It's very rarely. And you have very beautifully mixed it with prose and poetry. The reason that it just keeps you too integrated inside the book. So was it a conscious effort to mix prose and poetry, or how did this whole journey come of this too?
That's a great question. So, living in the diaspora, I've always been a huge proponent of teaching young children their language. So I'm a very strong proponent of, teaching Punjabi, for instance, to young Punjabi children. Now, that said, it's always a bit of a challenge. Now, as my journey was progressing, when I started out, I couldn't read Gurmukhi. The only language I could read was English. Of course, I could read Devanagari, so Hindi, Nepali I could read, but not Gurmukhi. So I really couldn't engage with the beautiful mystical poetry of the Guru Granth Sahib. So over the years, in my mid-20s, I taught myself Gurmukhi, and I started to read the Guru Granth Sahib in the original. Now, reading the script is not really sufficient, I should make this point, because of the number of different contributors to the Guru Granth Sahib, when they lived, where they lived, what languages they spoke. There are multiple languages that the writings in the Guru Granth Sahib appear in. So it was a very difficult journey for me. And I remember as I was writing the podcast and the book, I wanted to convey a sense of the beauty of the poetry to my young listeners and my readers. Now, I have to say this, translating poetry from one language to another is very challenging. And when you're trying to translate mystical poetry, the challenge becomes an order of magnitude greater. The dilemma is that if you translate to the letter, then if you translate every word, for instance, what you end up with is very prosaic, and the bhav or the beauty is completely lost. So I engaged with the Guru Granth Sahib. After that, I engaged with some of the writings in the Dasam Granth, which is it's not a scripture, it's a compilation of writings associated with the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh. And then, as my journey progressed, I started engaging with the writings of people like Bhai Veer Singh, who was a great savant and a writer who wrote primarily in the 1920s and 30s. And then finally, beautiful epic poetry written in Braj Bhasha, written by the likes of the poet Santokh Singh and others, who wrote these brilliant, colorful accounts of the lives of the gurus in Braj, which is a language which is not very prevalent these days. So as I was writing the book, one of my agendas, if you will, was to try and capture at least a little bit of the beauty of the original poetry, whether it's from the Guru Granth Sahib, whether it's from the Dasam Granth, whether it's from the Gur Pratap Suraj Granth. And the method that I used was translating to the spirit and not to the letter. So my translations are not literal. They are intended to capture the spirit of the original poetry. And my goal really is, even if a handful of my readers are motivated to go back and read the poetry in the original, my job would be done. I really want to expose them to the beauty of the original poetry. And for those who are never going to do it, at least I try to provide an approximation in my translations. So to answer your question very directly, it was a deliberate, absolutely, it was very, very deliberate. And the purpose was to convey at least an essence of the beauty that I had found in the original writings to my readers.
Well, sir, you mentioned you were trying to capture the spirit while translation, but you also captured our hearts, because every poetry actually touched our soul. And like you said, many a times we will not really take the effort of going and reading that poem. But today, because you've enlightened us with these poems, automatically there is a curiosity to go and read much more. So I must say that what you thought, you have achieved it, and all viewers here are saying it is brilliant, it is beautiful, and it has touched our souls and our heart. On this note, I think, why don't you recite one of the poems from your book for us with the translation?
Sure, I'll be delighted to do it. So before I read, let me set up the context a little bit. So we are now in the time of Guru Ram Das, the fourth Guru of the Sikhs. His family is rocked by internal dissension. It's starting to become pretty obvious that his youngest son, Arjun, is the most capable and is likely to succeed his father as the guru. But Arjun's oldest brother, Prithi Chand, who is also very capable, is intensely jealous. He feels that I'm the oldest son and I should inherit the Gurgaddi. So that's the context, and I'll read an excerpt and a little bit of a translation. The Chatrik, or rain bird, also referred to as the babiha or papiha, is a mythical creature that appears often in spiritual or romantic writing from the Indian subcontinent. The chatrik is used as a literary device to express desire and yearning. The bird is said to make an appearance before the monsoon rains, which invariably arrive after long, hot, parched summers. The chatrik sings its song plaintively as it awaits the rain, for it can slake its thirst only by drinking raindrops. Often signifying unrequited love, the chatrik dies of thirst as the rains are late or it can't drink enough rainwater to survive. The song of the chatrik is a beautiful metaphor for spiritual yearning and is used often in the writings of the Sikh gurus. So the young Arjun is sent to Lahore by his father from Amritsar to represent the family at his wedding. And he's told, don't come back until I send you a letter. The reason why the Guru sends him is twofold. One is to keep him away from the jealousies of his older brother. And secondly, it's a test. So even though Arjun kept himself busy in Lahore, he constantly yearned to return to Ramdaspur to be at the Guru's side. In vain, each day he waited for a messenger carrying a written summons. Finally, he decided to do something. He sent for a paper, a pen, and ink, and composed a quatrain which he addressed to his father, the Guru. मेरा मन लोचे गुर दर्शन ताई बिलप करे चात्रिक की न्याई तिखा न उतरे सांत न आवे बिन दर्शन संत प्यारे जियो हो कोली हो कोल कुमाई गुर दर्शन संत प्यारे जियो. I yearn for you, my Guru, beseech. Thirsty rainbirds cry my speech. Unsated I am sans repose. My eyes seek you, you are not close. My soul to you a sacrifice. Only will your presence suffice. So I won't read the whole story because it will become too long. But the short version is that his brother Prithi Chand, who's on the lookout, intercepts the letter and hides it because he knows that if the Guru reads that beautiful letter, his love for his youngest son is only going to increase. So he seizes the letter from the messenger. Arjun finds out and he writes a second letter. तेरा मुख सुहावा सहज धुन पानी चिर हुआ देखे सारंग पानी धन स्वदेश जहां तू वसया मेरे सज्जन मीत मुरारे जियो हो कोली हो कोल कुमाई गुर सज्जन मीत मुरारे जियो. As beauteous as your face, thus blissful is your speech. The rainbird parched forever your solace does beseech. Oh, blessed is the country whole, where dwells the master of my soul. A sacrifice my soul to you, my master friend, my lord so true. Same thing, the messengers intercepted again. This time, the young Arjun decides to write the letter 3 on top of the new letter, and he writes, एक घड़ी न मिलते ता कल जुग होता हुण कद मिलिए प्रिय तुद भगवंता मोहे रैन न विहावे नींद न आवे बिन दर्शन देख गुर दरबारे जियो a second without you, dark age entire. When will we meet, beloved sire? This painful night I can't endure. Your court I seek, exalted, pure. A sacrifice I am to you. To the glory of your court it's true. This time the messenger avoids Priti Chand and delivers the letter to the Guru, who reads it and starts crying at the love that his young Sikh, his son, has for him. Then he notices the number 3 and he says, if there's a 3, there must be a 1 and a 2. Long story short, he sends somebody to search Prithi Chand's house, and the letters are found in his coat pocket. And then the Guru realizes that the oldest son has been trying to keep his youngest son away from him. He sends his most beloved Sikhs to Amritsar to fetch the young Arjun. He is brought back, and the Guru says, the poem is not complete. It needs one more stanza. Why don't you write another stanza? And then Guru Arjan writes, or not Guru, he's not Guru just yet. He's just Arjan at that time. भाग हुआ गुर संत मिलाया प्रभ अविनाशी घर में पाया सेव करी पल चसा न विछड़े जन नानक दास तुम्हारो जियो हो कोली जियो कोल कुमाई जन नानक दास तुम्हारे जियो. Fortune has smiled, my masters near. The immortal Lord I find right here. Part from you will never again. Your humble slave shall he remain. A sacrifice I am to you. Nanak is your slave, it's true. And that's when Guru Ram Das realized that his youngest son was ready to step up. And that's when he anointed himself as a successor, and Arjun became Guru Arjan.
Wow, sir, thank you for making our life more beautiful with this recitation. And while you were reciting, we had a lot of comments coming in here saying it's beautiful. These emoticons, the smiles, the roses, the hearts, and hearts in all colors that have been coming in, the sun sign, the wow, and they are on and on still going on. But because we are short of time and we need to end this live, we would like to know from you, what would you like to tell our viewers about the book and how is it being on our chat show?
Well, first of all, I am delighted by the lovely and generous response from the audience. I also want to thank you for conducting this session and My Secret Bookshelf for organizing it. Thank you for the lovely questions. I guess if there's anything I want to say to the audience, I would say, read the book. You know, a lot of young people have been enriched by it. This is not a book just for Sikhs. You know, the Sikh gurus were divinely inspired, but ultimately they were human. So in a certain sense, this is a very human story. It's a story of sons rebelling against their fathers. It's a story of teachers teaching their children. It's a story of traitors and deceit and battles. So yes, this is the story of the Sikh gurus from 1469 to 1708, but it's a rousing tale, and read it not to be educated, but read it to enjoy the stories, because this is part of our heritage in the Indian subcontinent, and it's a part of our heritage that unfortunately not a lot of people know about. And by the way, I'm very easy to find. So once you do read it, and if you have any observations, comments, or questions, reach out to me. I always love to hear from my audience.
So viewers, on this note, you know that you can contact Sir, DM him when you read the book. If you haven't read the book, then please do go read the book. And you can also be on mysecret.bookshelf and keep seeing the reviews that are pouring in on this book. And we are really grateful for you today that you for your lovely time, and hope to see you soon with your next book, book 2 on story of
Thank you so much.